It's a living being. And people don't understand that, in that they basically flush their toilet and they forget about it. But the process starts out with anaerobic digestion. That happens typically in a septic tank, where the bacteria that live in that tank live without the presence of oxygen. They get there by people pooping them there, plain and simple. There's no oxygen in your digestive tract. When you fart, everybody farts. You fart, Eric. I know you do.
I do.
Okay?
I do. And I'm told everybody poops too, but I've only read that in books.
Yeah, probably once a day at least.
Yeah.
When you fart, you're farting methane gas and CO2. There's no air, no oxygen when you fart, because it's an oxygen depleted environment inside your digestive tract. The bacteria that are in your digestive tract, breaking down the solids within your body, break down those same solids in that septic tank. When the water, which is the hydraulic side, we have the organic side is the solids, the hydraulic side, the water, when it leaves that septic tank, it's supposed to go into a highly aerobic environment, the air. It goes into the soil. The soil is supposed to be filled with aerobic bacteria. Those aerobic bacteria are going to eat the anaerobes, the viruses, the pathogens, the anaerobic bacteria that come out of that septic tank in that water flow. And the water then is percolated back into the ground, so ultimately it can be taken back up through our wells. It's a vicious circle. It's not something that happens quickly. From the time you put water into the ground in your septic system, it could be several years until it makes itself back into somebody's water system.
Wow.
But it is not scary whatsoever.
So if I were to try and summarize, I guess a septic system is basically it works the same way your body does, except you have a space in the ground or above ground where it starts with no air and it goes to air, and by the time it comes out, is it technically clean drinking water?
It's potable water again. That is absolutely correct. We then have, in today's world here in Pennsylvania, we have different technologies that will help enhance that process, but the process remains the same. So you've probably heard of, you have in the ground septic systems, you have elevated sand mounds, you have dirt micro mounds, you have drip systems, you have Elgin systems. You have a myriad of different types of sewage disposal systems, and those sewage disposal systems are each based upon the on-site conditions on a given property, and then what we would call advanced treatment that's put on the system to help Mother Nature through that process. We give everyone that we do a septic system inspection for what's called the Homeowner's Guide to Septic System. And on the cover of that document, it shows the most basic sewage disposal system. It shows the house, it shows a septic tank, it shows a distribution box, and it shows a drain field that has 3 trenches in it. That is the most generic type of septic system you can have. But there are then more complex septic systems, but again, they're nothing to be scared of.
Okay. What about maintenance? I mean, like once this thing is set up, is it just good to go? I hear people argue about this all the time. Oh, I haven't touched it in 10 years, or people who swear you need to have it pumped out annually.
So what I will tell our clients is that in my professional opinion, a sewage disposal system that is between 0 and roughly 20 years old can be pumped out once every 3 years. And that's regardless if it has one person in the house or say 4 or 5 people in the house. And we'll talk about there's more people in the house than maybe 4 or 5. And I tell everybody that having the septic system pumped out is not different than you getting the oil changed in your car. So when I have a client who says to me, I haven't pumped out the septic system in 10 years because it's only me living here, I look at them, sometimes I get in trouble for saying this, and say, well, when was the last time you changed the oil in your car? And they'll say, well, I just, I change it every 2,000 miles. But why do you do that? Okay, you're not driving it hard. And so therefore, when you change the oil in your car, you get the 21-point inspection that comes along with that oil change. The person doing is going to check the belts, the hoses, the tires, the tire pressure, and they're just doing it as a preventative maintenance type of thing. When you pump out the septic tank, your pumper should be doing the 6-point inspection. There's just not 21 things to look at, but they should be doing the 6-point inspection of the sewage disposal system in order to head off any type of issues that may be occurring or are going to occur. And so you should have it pumped out at a minimum every 3 years. From the age of about 20 years old to about 35 years old, the septic system, in my opinion, should be pumped out at a maximum every 2 years. I tell everybody, it's like, think of it this way. As we as humans get older, we go to the doctor more often because we wind up having more problems or more checkups. Now, you're still a young kid, Eric.
I am.
You'll learn, okay?
I'm practicing every day. I'm trying to get older. It's happening.
I was at my cardiologist yesterday. I was at my general doctor for both my 6-month checkups at both of them, okay? So as something gets older, somebody should be putting their eyes on it more often. Once the septic system gets to be about 35 years old in age, it should be pumped out every year, because now it's at that point that you really want to have it looked at every year, because things at that point could start to go wrong. But if you do the proper preventative maintenance on them, then you can extend it. You can extend its life. Now, if you're over occupying a dwelling, and septic systems in Pennsylvania are designed based upon the number of bedrooms, because the number of bedrooms dictates how many people can reasonably live in the house. A 3-bedroom house has a theoretical maximum occupancy for as far as people go, of 4. That's mom and dad in bedroom number 1, child number 1 in bedroom number 2, child number 2 in bedroom number 3. 4 people. A 4-bedroom house has a theoretical occupancy of 5. So it's mom and dad in 1 and 1 child in each one. And so if you're going to over occupy the house, you have a 3-bedroom house, you have 6 people living in it, you're going to organically overload it. You're going to put too much poop into that sewage disposal system. And because of that, it needs to be pumped out more often, because the anaerobic bacteria in your body that you're pooping in there will not be able to keep up with the digestion of that poop in that tank. It's simply you're overloading the bacteria with food. The only way to remove that organic overloading is to have that septic system pumped on a more frequent basis.
Okay.
You also run the risk that you're going to ruin the drain field, because you're going to be hydraulically overloading it. Water. 6 people obviously use probably about 50% more water than do 4 people. So you're going to be hydraulically overloading the drain field, but you can do things to minimize that. You can have a high efficiency washing machine, for instance, only uses about 1/3 of the water, as opposed to one of the older top load non-high efficiency washing machines. You can make sure you're using a dishwasher. A dishwasher will only use about 1/3 of the water that you as a human will use in order to do the same number of dishes. So you can mitigate the hydraulics with newer technologies like the washing machines and the dishwashers, but you really can't mitigate the organics other than to have that tank pumped out on a annualized basis.
Okay, so we've got 4 kids, so we're going to overload any house we're in ever. We're on public sewer, so it's not an issue, but I have been on private sewers before. If I put my family of 6 in a house that's not big enough to accommodate them, I put too much poop in the septic system, that just means I need to pump it more frequently, right?
Correct.
Okay. But then you said hydraulically overload. I can tell you we do a lot of dishes and we do a lot of laundry. I mean, what does that matter? Like, I can't get the drainage field pumped out. What does it matter if I put too much water in it?
The drainage field was sized based upon the soil's ability to drain the water in a given period of time, and the amount of water that it was expected to have. So if you put more water into it than it can actually accommodate, it's not going to drain. And we're going to then allow for those anaerobic bacteria, we refer to them as anaerobes, coming out of that septic tank. They're going to go into that drain field, and they're going to get to continue to live because they're in their home environment. They're in an oxygen depleted environment because it's holding water. The drain field's holding water. It's not supposed to hold any water. And when it does, when it goes into that environment and you take anaerobic bacteria and put it in contact with a carbon source, the soil, it will create what's called a biomat, which is like a black slimy material. But the interesting thing about a biomat is it's self-prophesizing because it basically is impenetrable to water. And I tell clients what happens is essentially you grow, because biomat is a living being, it grows. You're going to grow a sheet of plastic in the bottom of your drain field, because as it starts to hold water, because you are now hydraulically overloading it, and the anaerobes get to continue to live, and they create that biomat, it's self-prophesizing that the water starts going down even slower, and you will ruin that drain field.
So I'm turning my drainage field into a pool.
A swimming pool. You're absolutely correct. You're going to do that by putting a liner on the bottom first.
Yeah.
And then in order for the water to get out, it's going to start going out the sides. And then the liner is going to start to grow up the sides.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, water's heavy. So from the standpoint of hydraulic pressure, it's going to pop out in the surface of the ground.
Oh, so that's why when people say like, oh, I got sewage in my backyard, they probably killed their drainage system. Is that right?
Absolutely, they did.
Okay. I owe a big apology to a bunch of people.
Yes, absolutely. So if you see the lush green vegetation, but not the sewage yet, it's because it's right below the surface. Obviously, the sewage is a tremendous source of fertilizer and that nitrogen. That's why the grass is greener. And then more importantly, it's an ongoing source of water. So if you're in a drought condition, it's going to be greener. But also in the winter time, it'll often be greener because you have biological activity going on in that water. And when you have biological activity, you have heat. And when you have heat, you have more growth. So the grass is going to grow longer or more in the winter, where we have biological activity taking place in that soil right below that root zone.
Okay. So let's go back to what you were talking about before. So we know that we can kill the system by putting way too much water into it. We can put too much poop into it, but you said there were a couple other things. Like, why do we need to have somebody put eyes on it? You said there was like a 6-point checklist. So what else is breaking in these systems?
So there are various components in various septic systems that should be checked. In the septic tank, which is your first line of defense, there are what are called baffles. In the homeowner's guide to septic system, there is a picture that I show people all the time that shows a cross section of a septic tank. That particular document happens to call them T's, but they keep what we refer to as fats, oils, and greases, which come to the surface. They float in a septic tank. These solids fall to the bottom. Fog, fats, oils, and greases, they float to the top. It keeps them in the septic tank, because you certainly don't want to have fats, oils, or greases going out into your drain field, because they will clog the pores of the soil. So the baffles are a very important part. Baffles in septic tanks that were created prior to around the year 2000 all typically had concrete baffles in them, and they deteriorate over time and they'll fall off. And at that point, then the scum and the fats, oils, and greases, they'll make their way into the drain field and therefore severely cut the life of that drain field down. So when the pumper pumps out the tank, he should be looking at those baffles. And it's important that you only work with a pumper who is pumping it out of the access manhole, which is going to typically be a 24-inch diameter opening, not the little 4-inch or 6-inch pipe that you may see come up to the surface. That is an inspection port. It's not a pump out port. The only way to properly pump out a septic tank is to actually excavate, if you have to, if it doesn't come to grade, the access manhole and pump it from there. The septic system may have in it a pump. If it's some sort of a mound system, it's going to have a pump. The pump should be checked. Electrical connections in that pump tank should be looked at every now and then. If you have a mound system, it may have little white cleanout pipes. They're 1.5 inch diameter PVC pipe. They should be checked to make sure that you didn't hit them with a lawnmower. We do so many inspections where they've been hit by a lawnmower. You get the little old faithful geyser going on out there when the pump turns on. Grass is lush green vegetation because they're now spraying all that nutrient-rich water on the top of that mound. But those are all things that would be examples of what a reputable pumping company should be inspecting when they come out to do that pumping.
Okay. So then it's definitely important, because it's one of those things, what do they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of repair, right?
Well, that's true. And what I tell clients routinely is that you pay your homeowners insurance, you pay your car insurance, you pay your health insurance. Listen, it's only $300 every time you pump it. Pay your septic insurance. It's cheap money in the end. If you want to do it once a year, great. Again, if you use my scale of 0 to about 20, 20 to about 35 and over 35, it's only $100 a year for the first 20, 25 years. But again, you pay your other insurances, pay your septic insurance and have it done. Cheap money.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about then the flip side. Let's say the water's already blowing out of the drainage field and we've got sewage all over the lawn. What's the process? What do I do now? I mean, I just can't let sewage spill all over my lawn. How do I go and get a new one?
So it's essentially a 4-step process. And the one thing that everybody has to understand is in Pennsylvania, it's governed by Pennsylvania law. It's not municipality or county specific. So if you're working in Bucks County, for instance, the Bucks County Department of Health oversees those Pennsylvania rules and regulations. But if you're working in, say, Lehigh County or Northampton County or Berks County, there the actual rules and regulations are administered by someone at the local level. There isn't a health department in those municipalities. But it's essentially a 4-step process. The first is to do what's called deep hole probes, where we come onto the property with a mini excavator, we dig holes, climb down into them. So the holes will be 2 feet wide, up to 8 feet deep, and we're going to examine the soil. And what we're trying to determine is whether or not the soil at that location is hospitable to the aerobic bacteria that need to live in the soil to eat the sewage as they come past them. So if we're not giving the bacteria a home to live in, they're not going to live there, and therefore they're not going to eat sewage as it comes past them. That's why we have some systems that are mounds that stick up above ground, because what we're doing with the mound is we're actually creating a home for bacteria to live in. Some places you go, the soil itself is a good enough home, and we don't have to put the mound in. Step number 1. Step number 2 is to do what's called a percolation test. And that is where we actually dig a series of holes by hand and we dump water into them over a 2-day period. And we determine how readily the ground absorbs the soil, absorbs the water.
Right. Yeah.
The faster the water goes down, the smaller the drain field can be. The slower it goes down, the bigger it has to be. Again, just common sense. If it's going to take a long time for water to go down, we got to spread it out over a much larger area. The third step then is armed with the data coming from steps 1 and 2. It has to be designed in accordance with all the rules and regulations of Pennsylvania. That's done. That design then is given to the sewage enforcement officer for that municipality, whether that be at the county health department level or the local level, and they issue the permit, at which point then it can be installed. Installation is highly weather dependent. The last 2 years have been absolute killer, as you know, on the installation of septic systems. I was communicating with a client earlier today who has been working with the contractor since middle of 2018, going on 2 years to get the septic system installed. It's just way too wet. She asked me what she could do. You got to go do the sun dance, okay? Because other than Mother Nature cooperating, there's a lot we can do. But the permit to install it is good for 3 years, and it can be extended in 3-year increments. So in the sale of real estate, as you know, that does wreak a lot of havoc on some deals. And that's what we get into, having to hold escrows and things like that in order to make it happen and move on. But Mother Nature plays a big role in it, but permit is good for 3 years and can be extended in 3-year increments.
Okay. So let's say I think my system may be failed. Like I'm not sure. It looked a little wet back there. What should I be doing next? Should I just hide it because I'm not selling the house?
I think the next thing you should do is you should contact a reputable inspector to have them come out and actually look at the system to determine whether or not there's an issue. If there is an issue, is it a full-blown replacement type of issue, or is it some other fix? Is there a broken pipe? Is there something else that's happened to it? Maybe it's some sort of roots or something like that. What is the issue? But you want to have a reputable person come inspect it, look at it, spend a couple $100 to have that done, and that person can then point you in the right direction. I will tell you that most people know when their septic system is not when shot. They really do. They may have denial, they may be denying it to themselves, but they really do. And I know that from working with so many buyers and sellers, where I know that the seller was really hoping and praying that they're going to be able to sell the house without quote unquote getting caught. And unfortunately they get caught, and then they have to replace that system. But they had really already resigned themselves to the fact that they were going to have to replace it because they knew.
Okay.
And I tell people all the time, if you know that the system is shot, don't be spending the money on having somebody come tell you what you already know. Take those valuable dollars, hard-earned dollars, and just start putting them towards the ultimate fix.
That's a good point. Yeah, I have found that some people are guessing there's a problem. They don't always know. But to your point before, just have somebody look at it if you're unsure, because it could be, one of those minor issues. I've seen water bubbling out of the septic tank itself versus the drainage field, or, just poor installs. Or I remember you told me once about distribution tanks being, the D-box being a little bit adjusted, so it kind of spilled out, and they were able to catch it early enough that it was able to be fixed. There's just a lot of moving parts. And despite the fact that, you and I have met, I don't even know how many times, north of 100 times at septic inspections, I don't consider myself an expert. And that's why I'm here asking you a million questions. So
exactly. And education is the key to life. That's absolutely correct. Education is the key to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And along that lines, so many inspections that we do are, as you point out, are done for the sale of real estate. And one thing that really bothers me is when I do an inspection and the buyer doesn't even show up to the inspection. And the buyer should be at every inspection when you're buying a house, because you want to be able to educate yourself all the way from with the home inspector, from the electrical system to the plumbing to the roof to this to that. And the sewage is the biggest one. Today's reality is that most sewage disposal systems cost in excess of $35,000 to replace. You can replace the roof 3 or 4 times over on a lot of houses for what it's going to cost you to replace one sewage disposal system. So you would think the buyer would really want to be there and be educated, and they don't show up. That's a concern.
Yeah. This is actually bringing back memories, because I remember the first time we met, it was actually when I was looking to buy our second home. And we went out and we looked at the terrain, and the backyard was just wet. It was saturated. And you looked around, you looked at the lot. It was a small lot. It wasn't real big, maybe 1/3 of an acre. And by the time we got done with it, I said, so, all right, the septic system's failed. What do you suggest? And I think your advice was run.
Run. I tell clients several times a week that run. Don't crawl, don't walk, run. I don't care what direction you run. We'll meet at the bar later, okay? Right. But just run. Yes.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
I was going to say, and I say that often because there may not be a place to put a new septic system on it. Yeah. And what you never want to do is let somebody else's problem become yours.
Right.
When somebody else has the problem, let it be their problem, and they're going to have to fix that problem. You don't worry about it becoming your problem. And sometimes cheap is not cheap.
Correct. And that was the situation on that specific property many years ago. It was holding tanks or nothing. And the township claimed that they were going to install public sewer at the time, but no bids were, collected, no contracts were signed. So we looked at it and said, there's just way too much risk here. There's no point. So I greatly appreciated that.
Right. And especially in your case with so many people, you would go broke on holding tanks.
Yes. Yes.
And, I tell everybody in today's reality is to pencil in $125 per person per month living in a house on holding tanks. And there's math that I can explain to get you to that point, but suffice it to say $125 per person per month. So a family of 4 is $500 a month. That's a car payment. That's half of a mortgage payment. Yeah. That's a lot of money. And that's month in and month out. And it can be in perpetuity if public sewers are not coming.
And then that hurts from a resale perspective too, because I'm looking at it and saying, now I got to buy this property and I've got a $500 a month bill. You know, that
Correct.
property just went down in value dramatically.
And
Plus,
the
my
other thing
wife
is,
would never be happy.
yeah, right. It's very difficult to sell them FHA, VA, or USDA finance as well, because the government-backed financing will take those $500 a month example for 4 people. They'll take that into consideration in your income to expense ratios on an ongoing basis. You know, they put it right up with your taxes and insurance, because oftentimes it can be equal to or exceed some of that.
Correct.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that was really helpful. Is there anything else about septic systems you want to touch on while we have everyone's attention?
Again, going back to your initial question, are they scary? They're not scary whatsoever, as long as you're educated, and you have to take the time to educate yourself. And there are a lot of different types of septic systems, and we certainly don't have time to get into each and every one, and the nuances of each and every one of them. So it's important that you educate yourself for the one that may be on a given parcel. And you know, speaking to you as a realtor, the important part is that at a minimum, even when you're going to go sell a house, you're going to be the selling agent. I think that any selling agent should take the time to understand what kind of septic system is there, and be prepared to answer questions for a buying agent and or buyers about it, such that you can take away that scariness. Because if you're the type of realtor who just doesn't like sewage disposal systems, you can't let that come through, because you're having a disservice to either your buyer or your seller, depending on who you're representing, because it's really not scary. It's simple stuff in the end.
And they're so common in our area. What did you say, 8%?
60, about 2/3, about 67% over all of Pennsylvania, and certainly as you get into, you know, northern Bucks and Lehigh and Northampton and Berks and Schuylkill and up through the Poconos, it's all but 100% on site. You have these, you know, little tiny areas, urbanized areas that may have some public sewer, but generally it's going to be on-site septic. Absolutely.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
The other thing I'll pass on is that, for all intent and purposes, any septic system installed after 1996 probably will last forever. Unless you do something really stupid, it'll last forever. And the reason for that is that in 1996, the Commonwealth changed the regulations, and we went to what's called pressurized distribution. And so most septic systems after 1996 have pumps in them. And because they have pumps in them, they'll last all but forever, unless you do something really stupid. Okay. I'll just leave you there.
Yeah. Well, and we're referencing the drainage field specifically. Like, the tank will still degrade, I assume. We might need to replace that from time to time.
No, tank should last forever. Wow. I will tell you that, interestingly enough, I've had conversations that, well, the tank manufacturers will tell you that the concrete specifications have never changed. That's not true, because I have tanks that have been in the ground since the 1950s, 1960s that are perfect as like they put in yesterday. And I have tanks that were put in the 1980s and 1990s that are absolutely deteriorating. And I say it's because something changed in the recipe of that concrete. Whether it's the potash they're putting in it changed, or it's the actual Portland cement changed, something changed probably about the late 1970s through the late 1990s, that the tanks have deteriorated. But I haven't seen that lately on newer tanks, but the older tanks are just fine and dandy. But a tank technically should last forever. It really should.
This is why we need you out there. You're the only person I know that can discern concrete based on the decade it was made. You're like, 80s was this, 70s, you know.
Well, it's like pipe. You know, I can look at a septic system, or I can even walk into a house and look at certain plumbing features, and I know when they were constructed based upon the type of pipe it was.
Yeah.
You know, you had cast iron, you had terracotta clay, then you had what was called Orangeburg, which was made in Orangeburg, New York. It spun tar paper. That was the gift to the whole piping industry coming out of World War II and the Korean War, because metal was so expensive at that point. Then in the early 70s, you had ABS pipe, which is a black pipe. 1982 started Schedule 40, the white PVC vinyl pipe was 1982. So I can date things in the ground and this and that by the pipe that's connected to it as well.